Possibly related to dragons? Who knows? Overused at lower levels? Probably. Stale and boring creatures that are practically identical to goblins in every way when you actually use them at the table and in your game. They don't have to be. Today, we're talking about the #1 most requested KYPW Dungeons and Dragons monster, the Kobold. I hope you guys are ready. Let's get started. Welcome, adventurers! What's going on, guys? My name is Cody, and this is Taking 20, a channel about all things role-playing games. And this, of course, is Kill Your Party with Kobolds. So let's start off, as we typically do, by taking a closer look at Kobolds in the default D&D 5e setting, the Forgotten Realms. The first and most obvious thing about Kobolds is their size. Though over the last few editions of the game, they seem to be getting a little taller. Kobolds are still very, very small, only coming up to about 3.5 feet or so. But more than just their height, they are also not terribly sturdy creatures, and they're pretty frail. This is one of the reasons that kobolds with magical aptitude don't spend their time practicing divine magic, because usually if a kobold takes a vicious blow from a foe in combat, it's already too late. Kobolds understand their limits. Kobolds recognize that their size puts them at a pretty significant disadvantage, and as such, they are often easily indentured or enslaved into servitude of those who would take advantage of them. Two groups stand out immediately when it comes to having little tribes of kobolds around, and that's dragons, who the kobolds often revere as a god when they encounter one, and the drow, who enslave and put the kobolds' keen tunneling abilities to use and kind of have them also serve as their frontline fodder for their not-so-secret inner house warring in Menzoberranzan and the rest of the Underdark. Speaking of which, kobolds are incredibly well suited for the Underdark, as they have superior vision in the dark and are impressive in their abilities to tunnel out and excavate the stone. They are so good, it seems, that oftentimes large cities for humans will actually hire tribes of kobolds to dig out and create their new sewer systems. In fact, something that I thought was very interesting was that approximately 1/4 of towns and cities in Faerun have kobolds that have made their own warrens underneath of them. And oftentimes they are able to function completely unnoticed by the above denizens, living in more or less perfect harmony with them. This seems to paint a bit of a different picture of kobolds versus something like your stereotypical and much more aggressive goblin tribe, for instance. But that's not to say that kobolds aren't capable of defending themselves and their warrens. When pressed, kobolds are surprisingly capable warriors in their own right, working in tandem with one another, and again, ways that races like goblins or orcs just don't do. And that's because to kobolds, the tribe plays a much bigger role in their mentality and upbringing. Where orcs might carry a certain pride about them and their tribes, kobolds are literally communally raised by the entire kobold tribe. When a kobold lays an egg, it is sent off to the hatchery, and no care or thought is given to determine the eggs and hatchlings' originating parents. When they hatch, kobolds are raised by the entire tribe and are soon developed into hardworking miners, hunters, crafters, alchemists, and so on. Kobolds are also quite capable of learning and developing a gift for the arcane. And while it's true that kobolds often die young, they can actually live to be upwards of 120 years old, which they attribute to their dragon blood. Got that dragon blood. As such, it is not uncommon to find kobolds with abilities to work magic, which is almost always evocation magic, as it allows them to both defend themselves and put it to use during tunnel work, and actually divination magic in an attempt to predict and foresee future threats to the tribe. And finally, let's talk a bit about their religious worship, as we know that in the Forgotten Realms, the existence of gods is simply fact. Kobolds worship KURTULMAK, who is the god of kobolds. The short version is that he served Tiamat as a vassal and was tasked with retrieving some treasure that was stolen by the gnome god Garl Glittergold. Things didn't go great for KURTULMAK, and Glittergold trapped him in a maze-like cavern for all of eternity. This is another reason that kobolds don't have many clerics, as it's actually difficult for KURTULMAK to grant additional clerical powers to his servants from his sealed away maze prison. And lastly, we also have Koralyuk, who was once a winged servant of KURTULMAK that kobolds believe betrayed his master in some way. Thus, whenever an Erd is born randomly into the tribe, that is to say, a winged kobold, the rest of the tribe actually treats them poorly, often taking out their resentments on them. Okay, now that we know a bit more about their history and lore, let's talk about how to use kobolds in interesting ways in our campaign. But first, I want to give a huge shout out to our sponsor for this video, Miniature Market. I have been a customer for Miniature Market for several years now, and I personally recommend them to gamers. But specifically what I want to share with you guys today is about their killer tiny terrain line. If you're a dungeon master or game master like me, punching up your home games just doesn't get much easier than tiny terrain. These terrain pieces are ridiculously affordable at like 75 cents to a couple bucks, and they just work. I'll put a link down in the description below where you guys can go and check them out for yourself. Trust me, you're gonna dig it. The first tip I have for you when using kobolds is to use them with another more threatening monster. Because kobolds have a very, very powerful ability in pack tactics, but they just aren't that sturdy, you can often pair them up in a way that will let them get off some serious damage very quickly if your party doesn't give them the respect that they really warrant as damage dealers. Advantage on an attack with a static +2 bonus to damage whenever they hit is pretty nasty. And if your players are busy focused on the drow slavers controlling them, or you're the young dragon commanding a kobold tribe in its reverence, your players might find themselves actually being outraced in damage if they don't act strategically and deal with the relatively weak but still vicious kobolds first. And this could be a fun little dungeon master trick to dangle a seemingly more dangerous foe in front of your players, while the clever kobolds position themselves to focus down the party's caster or healer. The next tip I have is to pair your kobolds up with their traps. Kobolds are the one monster in all of Dungeons and Dragons that goes almost over the top with traps. They trap everything in sight. And they don't just set traps to weaken or stun whatever springs the trap. These traps are lethal. Corridors that suddenly burst into flames on both sides. Pit traps that kobolds can easily walk over without breaking that give out into a 40-foot drop whenever anything larger steps onto it. Swinging logs that don't catch small-sized creatures, so a group of kobold warriors can stand and fight safely before your party is nearly decapitated. And large piles of rocks stacked up high and out of sight that can crush an unsuspecting wizard's skull as he moves through the Underdark. Which leads me into my next tip: let kobolds fight on their home turf. Kobolds are very small and are incredibly sensitive to light. They aren't typically setting up ambushes out on the road while people are traveling during the day. No, they are much, much more effective when they can control their environment. This is where they can lead pursuers down tunnels that shrink suddenly, forcing them to either crawl or turn back, which of course allows the kobolds to put their arrow slits to work with the small spears and pikes that they have. The fourth tip I have for you when utilizing kobolds in your campaign is to not be afraid to give them magical items. With their affinity to dragons and aptitude for the arcane, I think that it is very reasonable to believe that a kobold tribe might have come across an item or two of great power. And my suggestion is to try something different than just a magical weapon that might be too big for a kobold to wield anyway, and instead look for items that might really throw off the flow of combat and, let's face it, the predictability by your players. Just throw that right on its head, like a bag of tricks or a flying broom or a figure of wondrous power. Imagine your players' faces when, in the middle of their scrap with kobolds, suddenly a bronze griffin joins into the fray. And my fifth tip is to make good use of guerrilla tactics. Don't have your kobolds simply exchange blows with the party's fighter. That's a race your party is going to win, and in a very boring fashion pretty much every time. Instead, have your kobolds engage the players on their terms. Use their superior vision in the dark to set up ambushes that hit and run on the party. How would your party react if combat started and the cleric in the back took 3 crossbow bolts and then the attackers vanished back into the darkness? This is where we can utilize those pit traps mentioned earlier for any pursuers. And don't forget to disengage and take the dodge action. With a small squad of kobolds granting each other pack tactics on a single target, disengaging and running away the following round can really challenge your players to be on their best guard and create a memorable encounter with the often underappreciated kobold. Okay, and finally, let's talk quickly about some cool ideas to punch these guys up. The first thing that jumped to my mind was playing right into that dragon relation further. And what's the one thing that screams dragon ancestry? That's right, breath weapons. The best part about this is the total shock and awe on your players' faces when they finally see it. Imagine your group all smug and confident wading into a battle with a bunch of little harmless kobolds when they suddenly get roasted as a group by 5 or 6 cones of fire bursting from every direction around them. I love this little tweak for a few reasons. First off, it's thematic. Second off, it is just a simple twist, but still elegant in its own way. And third, because it will absolutely wreck veteran players that aren't taking the threat seriously. The second way to punch up kobolds is a way that I like to punch up a lot of my humanoids that do have the intelligence capabilities to handle animals, and that of course is to give them a fantastic mount that will be very memorable for the players who aren't expecting it. In this case, I think that really anything burrowing makes sense here, but I'm going to go in a little bit of a different direction based off of a really cool scene written by R.A. Salvatore in the Underdark, and that's having a select few, or maybe even just a single kobold, ride a basilisk. And again, I like the theming here with both of them kind of having that reptilian quality to them and giving your kobold something that should genuinely frighten your party when they encounter it, making it fit perfectly with what we're trying to accomplish. And by hitting all of the right boxes for size and habitat, I think having a small kobold basilisk cavalry will be something that your players remember for a very, very long time. And the last way I came up with to punch up your kobolds is it's just something that really made me laugh when I started kind of working it out. And that's to take your kobolds and to just hulk them out. Seriously, just stat them out like an owlbear and add a few into your next encounter. Maybe a kobold sorcerer found an artifact that mutates the kobolds in an attempt to reconnect with their dragon ancestry better. And now, several of the tribe have been turned into large, lumbering, hulked out kobolds, while the others gain those breath weapons we mentioned earlier. Add in a basilisk mount for the tribe leader who wants the tribe to take over the city above the sewers that they live in, and suddenly you have a really cool campaign seed that, by the way, would be much, much more interesting than the same old kobolds that your players have seen 100 times over. So what do you guys think? What are some cool and interesting ways that we can use kobolds in our Dungeons and Dragons campaign? Do you have any favorite kobold memories? Share them with us down in the comments below. I want to thank all of the kick-ass patrons over at welcomeadventures.com for all of their support and for all of the feedback we received on the Mistwalker, my new D&D 5e class. If you like what I do here and you want to support more content like this, head over to welcomeadventures.com and grab some rewards for yourself. If this is your first time here and you love role-playing games as much as I do, I'd love to have you subscribe. Every week I put out new videos on GM tips, player tips, tutorials, and more. So if that sounds like something you might be interested in, just hit that subscribe button down below and come join us. Thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Cody, and may your games be filled with awesome memories and even better friends. I'll catch you guys next time.
Yeah.